Ben, you might recognize this photo.
Indeed, indeed.
Yeah. So these are actually a couple of Ben's kilns here in action down in Hawaii, and yeah, that's biochar being made. Some lovely tree branches there, and the thing we always like to show in these photos of biochar production is how clean the fire is, how you see those flames curling up, but you don't see any smoke. And of course, any of us who are out in the country, anytime we see a column of smoke in the distance, we know what's happened. That a farmer has one of those big great piles in the paddock and has lit it off, and you better bring your washing in. So one of the things we pride ourselves on in this style of biochar production is the absence of smoke and pollutants. It's very hot, very clean burn, and it really minimizes the problems for your neighbors. So I'll kind of speed through some of the FAQs here because a lot of you probably already know this, but a simple definition of biochar is that it's a form of charcoal, and it's produced at a high enough temperature to drive off all the icky stuff. So all the tars and oils and things like that. And what it leaves behind is a very porous structure that's mostly pure carbon and then the minerals. So if you burn it on down all the way down to ash, that ash is the minerals. But if you're making biochar, a lot of the ash stays bound up in the structure. And that's good because those are plant nutrients as well. The other important thing about biochar is we're not making it to be a fuel source or an energy source. So the intent is important, and it's usually going to be put into the soil or maybe water or possibly into building materials. And then there's the what is it made from, which we call feedstocks. And in general, these are any form of biomass, usually plant matter, and most typically wood, but it can also be crop residues, it can be manure, dried out, food processing scraps and leftovers like grape mark from the vineyards, and municipal solid waste streams. So that would be very near and dear to the composting world's heart. And in specifically talking about the way biochar fits into a composting operation, you can think about some of your troublesome materials. So like big, long, dry branches. They can be a real pain to chip, hard to, even to work with the loppers to get them down into reasonable size lengths to go into a pile. And then when it's time to turn the pile, you've got these long bits that jam your fork up, and it's no fun. So this is one way you can use those and still put them into a beneficial product. Flax, harakeke, cabbage tree leaves. Nobody wants to put those through a shredder. They do break down. It takes a long time, but they make wonderful biochar. And in fact, they're one of the best fire starters you'll ever have. And then the next one's a big one, and that's going to be the noxious weeds and grasses. And up north, I'm sure you would all agree that kikuyu is something you don't want to be putting into your compost piles, especially when it's still alive. Down here, we've got a bit of couch. We've got heaps of convolvulus, and we've got a real problem with pampas grass taking over some of the river bottoms and places like that. So all these plant materials make really good feedstocks for biochar, and that way you don't have to worry about rhizomes and seeds and stuff like that getting into your finished product and causing problems for gardeners. So it's kind of a win-win. Then obviously, if you've got diseased plant matter, if you've got stuff that's been attacked by a blight or a fungus or something like that, once it's been through a pyrolysis operation, it's completely safe and you won't have to worry about it. Same goes for things like bones and shells. So this is a great way to use mussel shells and things like that. So all the leftovers from your kai moana can go through the biochar kiln, come out the other side, and then they crumble up very nicely and they release those minerals and nutrients to the soil. So these are just a number of things that in a composting operation, things that you'd like to do something good with, but are kind of hard to treat if you just put them on the pile. So the things that biochar does, number one, that gets a lot of people excited is that it's a safe way to store carbon. And it's just taking that carbon that the growing plants took out of the atmosphere and keeping it out of the atmosphere for a long time. When we put it into the soil, it does a whole lot of really important things. It helps to hold water. It helps aeration and structure in the soil. It deals with nutrient capture, and it's a very good microhabitat. And this is a microscope photograph of a chunk of biochar close up. And you can see all those pores, those little tiny spots. So that's sort of like a sponge, and it holds on to water. It gives you lots of little hidey holes for if you're a fungi or bacteria, you can crawl in there and tuck up and procreate. It helps to stop nutrients from leaching through the soil and into the groundwater. And it's also good for things like feeding to animals and using in building materials. So it's an important thing for some earth building projects. We've used it on a living roof. It can be used in paving aggregate, concrete, all kinds of things. And it's not new. It's been around for millions of years, quite literally. People have been using it for thousands. And we're just now, in the past 20 or 30 years, learning a lot about what it is, how to make it work in farming systems and food production. So yeah, just generally cool stuff all around. The process of making biochar is something we call pyrolysis. You can think of it as interrupted combustion. We're burning something part of the way, but because we're limiting the oxygen, it doesn't burn all the way. So we're basically we're driving off the volatile components. We're driving off the gases and burning those, and we're leaving behind most of the carbon. And if we do this with something that starts off dry and is fairly woody, it's going to have way more energy than we need to do the whole process. So you don't need a bottled gas or anything like that to run this. You can literally start the fire with a bit of paper and kindling, keep adding stuff, and it cooks itself and has heat left over. So you can throw something on the top of it if you want to cook yourself a meal, or if you've got a bigger process, you can actually take this heat off and use it to maybe power a small generator, heat a glass house, heat water, things like that. And these methods of pyrolysis have quite a bit of variation. So there's a big range of scale and ways that people do this. But suffice to say, there's enough different ways to do it that you can usually find a way that fits well with the type of stuff you're dealing with, the type of resources you've got available, and can often be done for very, very low or zero cost. And as I showed in that opening picture, the way we can do it nowadays pretty much wipes out all the emissions that some of the old traditional methods of making charcoal used to have. So it's actually a much better way to deal with some of this stuff than just lighting it off in an open pile. This is just a quick visualization of pyrolysis taking place in a very familiar sort of setting. So if you look at the match, the matchstick itself is your biomass. As the heat envelops this little splinter of wood, it's heating up and forcing out a lot of gas, and that gas is flammable, so it combusts. The heat then drives off the gas, which then burns and also volatilizes some of the other products. So the lignins and starches in that wood are breaking down, and they're turning into simpler molecules. Some of those molecules are going up in gas. Other molecules, the carbon molecules, are fusing together. So that's the carbonization that's happening down there in the bottom part. And you can see it starting to glow a little bit. And then at the bottom, where it stops glowing, that's biochar. So you can do this with your match and watch it happen before your very eyes. It's quite entertaining. And then this is just sort of a quick list, little overview of some of the types of ways that biochar can be made. The kilns I showed you in the opening slide are called flame cap kilns. And that same process can be done in the ground, in a pit or a trench. Then some people make retorts, which is a retort is a closed vessel. And that is a vessel where some sort of feedstock is put in and then it's heated. So it might be inside a larger retort or a larger vessel that heats it. The bigger versions that are industrial retorts, some of those fit in shipping containers or on backs of trucks. And then we get up to the really big end of town. And those are the continuous reactors where you've got a conveyor or an auger feeding it in, and there's a big rotating drum, and it just goes and goes 24/7. And there's always biochar coming out of it. And those are quite often hooked up to the grid. So they're providing energy at a industrial or a community scale. And then finally, there are these things called air curtain burners, which are often used out in forestry settings or for disaster cleanup. And these are just often the thing looks like a big shipping container. They're often used if you're dealing with really large or wet or dirty feedstocks. They don't put out as much biochar, but if that's the only way you've got to treat the stuff, it's better than nothing. So the whole exciting thing about biochar and compost is that they really work well together. And in addition to the fact that pyrolysis can be a great way of dealing with the things that are hard to put through a composting setup, once you've got a supply of biochar, if you put that into your working compost, it does a whole lot of really cool things, add a lot of value to the compost, to the operation and process, and it actually improves the biochar. So it's good all the way around. But just like it does in soil, if you put it into a compost heap, it provides bulk and aeration. And this is really good because it means that as the pile starts working and settling, the biochar is providing lots of little blocks to hold it up and to keep the gas exchange going. So that's really important. It helps keep the pile working longer, and it means you don't have to turn it as often. It moderates your moisture levels in both directions. That sponge effect means that it keeps the pile from drying out, but it also means that if you get a heavy rainfall event, it can soak up more of the water and it won't be running off. It buffers pH, and it's typical that a working pile will start to go quite acidic along the way. Biochar tends to be on the alkaline side, usually around 9 or so. So it helps to buffer that, keep things a little bit closer to neutral. Just like it keeps the water from washing through a pile, it keeps the nutrients from leaching out. And that's really important because those are the things that you want to keep in a working compost heap and not running off into the waterways. Whoops. It very importantly, it acts as a microbial reservoir, sort of a refuge. I like to call it the coral reef of the soil. And in a compost heap, it just means that all your important bacteria and fungi get in there, and they can reproduce that much faster because they've got a safe place to start working. And as they do that, they go in and a sort of a biofilm starts to form over all the pores and surface area of the biochar. And then on that biofilm, you get these little nodules of organomineral complexes, and those start to do all these cool things. But one of the really important things they do is they keep the methane and nitrous oxide from forming. So adding biochar to a compost heap is really good because it's preventing some of these things from forming and getting into the atmosphere that we really don't want. And then, of course, another thing that we really don't want, especially if we're in an urban or suburban setting, is for our downwind neighbors to be complaining. And one of the things that biochar and activated carbon is really good at is odor control. So if you've got if you ever have a problem with a little bit of ammonia or hydrogen sulfide, biochar soaks that right up and keeps it completely out of sight, out of mind. And then finally, if you've got a composting operation and you're bagging up your finished product and providing it to the community, this gives you a bit of a differentiation. This lets you say to people, this stuff you're getting is different, it's better, and you can tell them the story behind it. It's just going to be one more thing that you can do to get people excited about using the compost itself. So here's a on the left, that's that photo that I showed you earlier, and that's raw biochar. That's sort of like fresh out of the fire. These images on the right are what happens when the bacteria and fungi move in. So you can see all the little rods and balls, and yeah, there's a party going on in there. So they love it. They go in there and they multiply and they do all kinds of cool stuff. So this happens in the soil, but it also happens in a working compost heap, and that's the big, cool, exciting thing. And then I've just got some pictures of big fancy snazzy biochar rigs. Probably nobody here has the pockets for one of these. These are a little bit more attainable for somebody who is doing a big regional sort of production. They might get into something like this. These come from earth systems across the ditch. These are what the air curtain burners look like in action. So you can see it's just a big box, and it's got a blower that keeps a stream of air directed across the top. And they put in quite large stuff. And at the end of the burn, they scoop it out with the digger, and it'll be mostly ash, but there will be some pretty good yield of biochar in that. And then these are a couple different versions of the TLUD, the retorts I was telling you about. The ones on the right are neat because those are actually little small modular cooking stoves. And those are developed originally for people camping, but some of the companies that make these market them all over the developing world. And they're really great because it allows people to cook using very small bits of wood, or even things like corn stalks and rice husks and things like that. And it allows people to cook without all the smoke that's associated with traditional charcoal fires. So this is really important in terms of air quality and people's health. So if they use these things to cook on, their indoor air is much cleaner, and they're not subjecting themselves to all the harmful particulates. So these stoves are starting to really take off in places like Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. And then yeah, so there's another flame cap kiln in action. This is a method that we like to teach people because it's so easy to do. It can be done with a simple pit in the ground, or it can be done with steel kilns like the ones that I showed you earlier. Ben and I have some like that. Trevor's got a big rectangular one. He can do some pretty big burns in that. But it's just a matter of starting a fire and adding material, and just adding it at a rate that keeps flames going, keeping a nice hot fire going. And you learn to manage the amount of fuel you're putting in with the amount of flames. And once you're good at it, you don't get any smoke. You just keep doing this, invite your friends over, make it a bit of a party. And at the end of it, you've got a vessel full of biochar. You can quench that either with water or put a cover on it. And this is a pit. This is down on the South Island about a year ago. Ben and his mate Sam and Trevor and I were down there, and we had this big old pit that we filled up with wilding pine on the shores of Lake Pukaki. And this is what it looked like. And you can see, if you watch the smoke around the edge, you can see it kind of getting sucked in to the flames and then disappearing. And that's the whole basis of this, is that the smoke is being generated, but as long as you have the flames, it's being consumed. So we just keep those flames nice and healthy, and they handle the smoke for us. So here's another couple of flame caps. The one on the left, that's at the Matakai at Parihaka. On the right, we have some bigger ones. Those are sort of like the one Trevor's got. Here we're getting up to some really big stuff. This is fun. They took a big old fuel tank, cut it in half, and then when it was done burning, instead of using a truckload of water to quench it, they just flipped it over. And then this is another takeoff on the flame cap that's called the Ring of Fire. And this is just some big sheets of plate steel. And they're bolted together with a ring. And there's a second ring around it so that you can actually stand next to it without getting barbecued. And then here's an example of somebody operating a pit. And then you can even do this in a pile. And the one pro tip is that you light it from the top instead of from the bottom. You don't get quite as much char out of the whole thing, but if you light it from the top, you get the advantages of the flame cap burn. The flames will eat most of the smoke, and it'll go quite hot and quite quickly. And then this is the last method is something you can do in your own fire. I just use these little stainless steel baking pans and fill them up, pop them in the wood stove, and then take them out the next morning. And yeah, that's my little spiel. Happy to answer questions. There's a couple of URLs, places you can go to get some more information.